Pickaxe.
Hello, and welcome back to the review of Death, your fortnightly home for Doctor Who news and reviews. I'm Matthew Toffolo. That's Billy Garratt-John. Howdy.
Hello, howdy.
How are you doing, Billy? You're in a new location.
Yeah, I'm in a new location because there are storms battering the whole of New Zealand. It started out as just the South Island on the west coast, and now it's travelled up to the Bay of Plenty in Auckland. And now I'm like, well, the last place I want to be is a building that could collapse on my head. So I'm in the main part of the house for a change. And
very nice.
That is the way it is. How's the weather in Bristol, Matt?
It's shitty and drizzly, so
I miss it terribly.
The weather's been really bad here so far this year. It's just been absolutely appalling. I took a week off the other week, and me and Annie were like, "Oh, we'll go off and do some nice things." Couldn't do anything. The weather was just crap. So we were just like, right, okay, stuck indoors, nothing to do. Very annoying.
Well, when you're stuck indoors and there's nothing to do, is there a better Doctor Who story to watch than the Ambassadors of Death?
Well, quite. In fact, that is literally what we did over that week, was watch the Ambassadors of Death. But before we get on to the Ambassadors of Death, any news?
Well, there was Jesus Christ. There was sort of Russell said that they can't use the Beatles, but they're doing a Beatles story.
Yeah. But he said that was the plan, wasn't it? The idea, that was what the inspiration was, that we can't use their music. How do we do the Beatles without being able to use their music? And I think you came up with the idea of, like, does Jinx Monsoon, who has now been revealed to be called the Maestro.
The Maestro, yes.
Yeah. Which I got to laugh at. Doctor Who fans, man, you're a different breed, because everyone was like, you know, how can I say this without sounding like a smarmy
Matt,
song?
just say it. Twitter doesn't mean anything. It's not real.
You know, anyone with an education would go, Maestro. Oh yes, it's musical related. You know, that's that you call the conductor, the composer. They're the maestro. That's it.
Indeed.
No, not in Doctor Who circles. Quick, Google, what does maestro mean? Oh, it means master. Oh, it must be that Jinx Monsoon is the master. No. Now, if it does turn out that Jinx Monsoon is the master, I would, of course, eat my words. But I think Russell probably, you know, he knows what you sad bastards are like.
Because he is the sad bastard himself.
Exactly.
Being a Doctor Who fan, that means.
Yeah.
Lots of weird noises. Sorry. I do feel like I like the idea that you go, okay, we can't use the Beatles music, so how can we make a story out of the Beatles? And I like that. That's a cool idea, because it's sort of like, we have no money. How do we make a science fiction TV series where the main character travels through time and space? It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think with something so iconic, I'm just now a bit concerned that they won't even get vaguely the sound or the feel. You know, like, part of me thought, okay, if they've got the Beatles, maybe they've wrangled, 5 seconds of Hello, Goodbye or A Hard Day's Night or something. But the fact that they've just gone, well, no, that's out of the question. I'm now sort of like, okay, obviously, but also slightly let down, you know, in that classic Doctor Who fan way.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, I guess we just have to wait and see, don't we, really? I mean, it might work out. It might make sense within the realms of the story. But like you said, you kind of do want to hear, the iconic chords, like introing Hard Day's Night, or just something, just a little twinkle of, oh yeah, that's the Beatles.
Well, the thing is, a lot of those early tunes, Twist and Shout, for example, that it wasn't written by the Beatles. It's a cover, so there are probably a couple of tunes they could maybe do in a Beatles style and pay a reduced fee because it was written by an artist that nobody remembers or has heard of.
Yeah.
A Taste of Honey, Misery. I think that was a Beatles cover from the first album. But, there's stuff they could do. But I'm just a little bit disappointed that we're not going to have the shang from A Hard Day's Night or something, because in my head canon, that was what the Devil's Chord was.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be a nice thing. And then, if you're going to do the Beatles in Doctor Who, get the songs. I mean, I know that the DVD release of, Remembrance of the Daleks was a ball ache because they had Do You Want to Know a Secret in the background.
Yeah.
But you don't want it to be an issue in perpetuity, I suppose, for future releases.
Yeah, that's it, I guess. Because obviously, when they were making stuff back in the day, like The Chase and, Remembrance of the Daleks, that just obviously wasn't on their radar, the idea of, we need to worry about home video releases and repeats and streaming and all this sort of stuff. That was another world. But I mean, now today we are so commercially switched on that that comes up in the very early
especially
stages.
Disney. But you think that getting into bed with Disney would mean that you get access to the office of MPL and you can get on your hands and knees and say, please, Mr. McCartney, can we use 30 seconds of blah, blah, blah? But the fact that it hasn't yielded that, it doesn't mean, well, why are we bloody doing this in the first place, getting into bed with the House of Mouse? But you want it to be able to open certain doors,
Yeah, outside of just an increased budget to make things look pretty, for those things. And of course, with the Beatles' ties to Peter Jackson and obviously, the documentary that's on Disney Plus, you almost think that someone could have said, well, if we ring up Peter Jackson, he's obviously on good terms with Paul McCartney and Ringo. Yeah. Maybe he could put in a good word for Doctor Who.
Maybe. And, it's not just that. There's a great series called 321 on Disney where Paul McCartney, I think there's a series of different artists, but there's one called McCartney 321 where Paul and Rick Rubin listen to multi-tracks and stems of Beatle recordings and Wings recordings and stuff.
Right.
And so you think, okay, there's a relationship there. And now there's this new Beach Boys documentary that's going to appear on Disney as well. It sort of feels like, even with bloody WWE being bought by Endeavour, TKO, and that going on Netflix soon, everything's being homogenized. So if you're going to get into bed with a big conglomerate that can have conversations, maybe you want to figure out what those parameters are. Can we use certain things before writing the story? I don't know. I mean, that was the whole point of the article, wasn't it? It was Russell saying, can we, can't we? Or we can't. Well, let's figure out a way around it. But
and I mean, they did, everyone was sort of pointing out like, Big Finish has already done this with John Smith and the Common Men. And it was done so well. But obviously, you can do it in that story because, they are a fictitious... They're not actually the Beatles. They're not actually the Beatles. Yeah, they're a fictional band. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I still think... From what we said in our trailer reaction when we saw someone's face coming out of that drum, I still think that probably the Beatles get turned into instruments or something. They get whisked out of time. They can't make their music, and then it cocks up the whole of history because people can't groove to the Beatles, man.
If the Beatles aren't there to sing about peace, love, and harmony, then we don't end up in this situation where there is world peace in every single corner of the globe, which we're enjoying right now. Yeah,
that's right.
Right. Talking about the sorry state of international affairs, let's talk about the ambassador's shang of death. Which
that's my first note, actually.
Shang.
Love the twang.
We love the twang. And it's the twang is the reason that this is called the Review of Death. And I remember... After we recorded the Death to the Daleks review in your bedroom nearly 10 years ago, because it's 10 years of Rod this year, I remember getting driven back home and messaging you, we should call ourselves the Review of Death and put the ambassador's twang in the intro. Yeah. And so it came to be. And to become one... There you go. Let's get a Spice Girls Doctor Who story in 20 years' time.
Yeah, why not? I think the story should be that Posh Spice has been erased from time because Victoria Beckham doesn't want to remember she was part of the Spice Girls.
True. That's a nice one. I like that. I thought you were going to say that Posh Spice becomes Lady Cassandra, but
or that, yeah.
Give it a couple more years. So, The Ambassadors of Death. It's season 7.
Yes.
It's 1970. Now, I was looking obviously through the run of stories that come in this year. It's John Pertwee's first year as the Doctor and Caroline John's only year as Liz Shaw. Is it the best pound for pound, episode by episode season of classic Doctor Who?
It's certainly up there. We ranked it highly, didn't we, when we did our episode season ranking? Yeah, I mean, they're all very good. The first story is very good. Is a really strong opener. Silurians. The whole thing is it wasn't Terrence Dicks, but was it? I can't remember who
Derek
it was.
Sherwin.
Was it Derek Sherwin who said, we can't do alien invasions all the time? Or was it Malcolm Hulke that said, you've got 3 stories that you can do? Alien invasions.
Oh, that sounds like Terrence.
Or we go to them, or they're already here,
Yeah.
And it's true, and it works beautifully, Even though we're not allowed to leave Earth, although they do leave Earth in this story. Although we're not allowed to leave Earth, they are very creative with the ways in which they're able to get around that in this season. But yeah, I mean, I think the only criticism one might have for this season is just that the stories can be quite long, with the exception of Spearhead.
Yeah, I mean, when I posted on the Rod Twitter account and said, what does everybody think of this story?
Yeah.
Everybody said, it's great. It's just too long. It's great, but it's 7 episodes. It's great, but 7 parts is far too much. Yeah. And that's true. I think if you pair this back to 6 parts, it's fantastic. I don't think it can exist as a 4-parter because there's a weight to the story and the way that it develops and where it goes, and just the depth of characters and what happens to them through it. But it's slap bang in the middle of, we can still get away with doing, big, epic 7-part serialized adventure stories, can't we? And it's kind of the last year that they agree that they can do that across the board.
Yeah, and the whole season just feels very bold, especially coming off of the back of almost being cancelled. Obviously the big draw is that it's now in colour, which really helps. But it's just interesting to see them tell very different types of story, and until this point, and I don't think they've really ever done it again. They've never really told a story like this at this point, and they haven't really done it since. It's a real James Bond espionage spy thriller that just happens to have a couple of aliens kicking around.
Do you think this is where the James Bond Third Doctor link starts? Because it's not even just James Bond. It's very ATV, Thames Television, Sweeney,
Avengers,
Avengers, gritty. Yeah. It's shot on film. So much of it is shot on film. You think you get towards, even in episode 7, you'd think, okay, they've run out of money to shoot stuff on location, but it keeps going and stuff is still shot on film. Yeah. And it still looks sumptuous. It looks great. I mean, I was going through my notes. I was like, hang on, is that 2 parts or 2 episodes in a row where they've involved a helicopter or an armed siege on a convoy involving multiple flatbed trucks and armed jeeps and loads of extras and stunts and all that kind of stuff? I mean, it feels big, this story, in a way that other episodes this season don't particularly.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Watching it back, it was interesting to see just how much of an action epic this one can be. Any attempt to get in a fist fight or like a gun battle, they're like, right, let's do it. I will say though, Unit in this story absolutely bloody useless.
Not only Unit as a whole, but particular members of Unit, specifically the Brigadier. Don't hand Nicholas Courtney a fucking gun. and shoot his eyes while he's firing it. Because he's as bad as Matthew Waterhouse when he's typing in Earthshot.
Yeah.
He's petrified of holding a live weapon in his hand.
Yeah, he is. He's not the most macho of unit troops, is he?
Terrible.
And there's that bit
his
at
heart.
the end when he goes to rescue the Doctor and Liz from the little bunker, and he gets into that fist fight, and every throw of a punch feels slightly held back, like, oh, I don't want to hit you.
Maybe Nicholas Courtney knows he's a walk-in weapon, and he's like, I could kill you if I wanted to.
Yeah, it's like that,
they've all done national service.
It's like that Ross Kemp in Extras bit. You know what SAS stands for? Super Army Soldier.
That is UNIT, isn't it? UNIT are super army soldiers. And there's so much UNIT, action in this story.
Yeah.
But we should start with what the bloody heck is going on. Because it's a beautiful setup. Very much influenced, at least in terms of some of the model work, by Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
1999.
Yeah.
Because, the only issue I have with the story, I'll be completely honest, for the most part, is the music.
Oh, okay.
Mainly that fucking Hammond organ that plays over every single space sequence, which just makes me think of the ending of that episode of Red Dwarf.
Yeah.
Where Rimmer goes, okay, take it away, Scutters. And you hear the Hammond organ music playing at the end.
Red Dwarf theme, yeah.
I can see what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
But firstly, from a cynical perspective, I'm like, you're playing for time. You're just trying to fill out the runtime of this week's episode. And also, the model work is fine, but it's not at that kind of, we've got Pally with the Jerry Anderson lot and have started sharing their props yet, which you start getting around Frontier and then later in the 70s.
Yeah, I think, that the Hammond organ music is weird, but I guess it does evoke those feelings of, I don't know, like
Old
David Bowie, people's homes, like David Bowie, like Major Tom and all that sort of stuff. I think that's this kind of vibe that they're going for. Whether or not they reach it, that is up for debate. No, they don't.
Have you heard any David Bowie?
No, you know what I mean. But I think
that's a Hammond organ in a David Bowie song.
David Bowie's Hammond organ greatest hits remix. But I think that's the sort of vibe that they're going for. They're trying to go for this weird. I don't know. It's bad.
I know what you're saying. But it just comes across as lounge music. It's like the guy from the Fast Show is going to turn around and go, nice. Every single time the space probe starts coupling or whatever. But what an amazing... the first 3 episodes of this story are just so beautifully paced.
Yeah.
Like, you could make that the first part of a Doctor Who movie. In fact, I think this whole story would be a perfect Earthbound Doctor Who film, because you've got action set pieces left, right, and centre. You've got people running off and doing their own thing. And that whole opening section where we're watching a kind of BBC broadcast with Michael Wisher in, I believe, his first role in Doctor Who.
I think so,
and he's in it all the way through. Like even when you get to episode 7 and he's sort of doing the address to the world and saying, we're about to make contact and the ambassadors are about to arrive and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
He's quite an important character all the way through. We've never seen, the effect on Earth of extraterrestrials reflected in Doctor Who in this way before.
No.
And it's done so well.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Like the only other time where we get that news report thing really happen up at this point is 10th Planet. They do a little bit there, don't they, where they're like, the aliens have landed sort of thing. And
then it's not really until the Demons or Frontier that you get anything like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we should talk about this now, because obviously we just done Aliens of London, where we talked about how well it's done there.
Very timely.
So that ties up very neatly, those two. The whole thing, the whole production at the start you can just see there's a bit of money there, from
Definitely.
the Space Center set is really cleverly done when you've got the sort of glass blue screen, which they then use as the chroma key screen for all the stuff. That looks really clever. And
even the little elevator that people come up and down on.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, my dear sir, I don't have a pass. Fuck off.
Yeah. That gag that seems to follow Pertwee's Doctor, at least through that first season. He never carries a pass. And I mean, there's like really clever little tricks to do space travel on a budget. Like, I love when the guy is coming out of Recovery 7 and they've obviously shot it, but in the edit they've twisted the camera upside down so it makes it look like he's floating. They slow down the footage again to try and give it that weightlessness. It's really clever little techniques that they've gone like, well, we can't do any wire work because that'll take too much time and cost too much money. But if we do this, it will at least make it seem like we're in space. It's really great. I love it. Very clever.
So the story in a nutshell is a probe, Mars Probe 7, is sent up to Mars, weirdly enough. And they haven't heard from it for a fair amount of time. Is it 6 weeks or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
And they send a recovery probe up. And when the recovery probe docks, they lose contact with the recovery probe. And then this signal starts being transmitted. And then you get into this whole, run around espionage thing of the signal is actually being sent from somewhere. I love that scene where they're trying to triangulate where the signal's coming from.
Yeah.
And it's like, fucking give it up. It's somewhere within the vicinity of Bedfordshire. It's somewhere near London. Come on,
yeah.
And
I love that as well. It's always near London. It's always like just outside of London. Yeah. Handy that, isn't it?
It's very useful.
It's not like, it's come from South America,
Yeah. We're not quite to the stage yet where these people are relocating to, I don't know, Cardiff.
Yes.
Give it another 40 years and maybe they'll start using that as a base of operations. But yeah, so then Mars Probe 7. And what I love about those early episodes of this story is the creeping dread of all the action happening away from home, like the actually important stuff. Like the stuff on the ground is just sort of action and set dressing to get from week to week to show the audience something actionable, something visually stimulating. But there's a creeping dread in this story of the recovery probe is coming back and they haven't heard from them. And we don't know what's going to happen when they finally turn up.
Yeah.
And then when the probe does get back to Earth, there's a lot of importance is put on who gets there first and, what they're going to find when they finally open the capsule. Yeah. And obviously that builds to one of, and I've completely forgotten about a latter cliffhanger in this story, but the first absolute solid gold Doctor Who cliffhanger, we've talked about it before, is how many beans make 5? All that stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that cliffhanger is just magnifique.
It's so good. The way this story is, there's some real good editing in this story. That cliffhanger in particular, the cutting back and forth from John's face to the controller to, and it's slowly zooming in, isn't it, on Pertwee's face. We're closing in a little bit more until the final, cut it open and then it cuts to the credits.
Slam cut into the credits.
Yeah, it's great. And even earlier on, when Recovery 7, when the guy opens the door and you get the scream or the noise, and there's that really frenetic cutting of the noise and then his face, and then they do it again when the sound plays in the control center. There's a lot of very fast-paced cutting there, and it just disorientates you, and it just makes you feel uneasy. You think, oh, this is weird. There's something really odd and eerie going on here. Very clever techniques. Simple, but really effective.
Talking about the James Bond link as well, because it's funny, having started doing the the Double O Rod stuff on the Patreon, I'm starting to notice more links to Bond in sort of wider popular culture. Like we sort of talk about Doctor Who borrowing elements from here and there and all that sort of stuff. But to see an action hero who is part of the Authority and part of like an establishment sort of body, but is super anti-authoritarian and has a gadget-laden car, gets involved in car chases, and all that stuff with the Doctor gluing Carrington and Reagan and stuff to the car with Bessie and all that. Yeah. It's so of its time. It's very Avengers. I think somebody even said on Twitter that this is almost like Doctor Who being made by ITV of the time. Yeah. You know, it's got a gritty weight to it with everything being shot on film, which most of, you know, the kind of high-end dramas on ITV were all shot on film at the time. It's got a certain dynamism and a certain edge and a certain coolness to it that even just isolated to this series, you don't get it either side of season 7 sort of going forward or even going back.
No, I think, you know, I get they sort of try and do it with The Mind of Evil, but it's not quite the same. It doesn't quite work in the same way.
We've moved on by then. It's the comic book era now, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, even this, you know, that sequence with Bessie when, you know, Carrington and his henchman are stuck to the car, you know, it always makes me think of Adam West Batman when you've got like the label anti-theft device, you know, and he switches it on. So it's funny, isn't it? All those little influences, like you said, all really coming into play. I mean, certain things, again, sticking to the Bondness. Obviously, we've got big laboratory space centers. We've got sort of like dolly bird scientists helping out around the place. What I do appreciate though is that the scientist girl in the first episode or two, she actually has some like techno babble that makes you think, well, actually, she actually knows what she's doing. They haven't just hired her just to say, oh, there's too many blokes here. We need a few skirts for the dads, you know?
Yeah, it's not a complete sausage fest. And also, I mean, that's a great way to sort of transition into Liz, because I think Caroline John as an actor in Doctor Who, but Liz Grant sort of more generally as a character and a companion, is a massively under-respected, underappreciated in the sort of grander scheme of the series, because it's not like a sort of companion, a character, say like a chameleon that's around for, you know, around for a cup of coffee and then buggers off, and actually in the grand scheme of things makes any scene they're involved in worse. You know? Yeah. Liz Shaw is fantastic and is a really great foil for John. It's just a shame that I think John has clearly gone, well, no, I want somebody to put my cloak around and say, don't worry, dear, I'll be fine. And Caroline John as an actor and Liz Shaw as a character is not that.
No, not at all.
But there's a bit where I think there's like a data readout about the radiation level that the astronauts are carrying. And it's not like the Doctor has to rip it from the machine and sort of study it. And she goes, what does that mean, Doctor? It's like, you know, she goes, this radiation level's far too high. They'd be dead if, you know, the Doctor doesn't need to do that exposition. And it saves a lot of time in the script. I mean, that's only like a couple of lines, but when you build it up and how many times the companion asks, oh, Doctor, what's that? Or what can I do, Doctor? And all that sort of stuff. Liz actually helps slimline the narrative because she can do all the exposition and then you just have to get to the next scene. You don't need to worry about her necessarily getting in trouble or tripping over or hurting her ankle or anything like that. She's sort of immune from all those, you know, silly foibles that companions sometimes fall into.
Yeah, very much so. And I was sort of thinking that watching this is that she is kind of underappreciated, isn't she, as a companion? You know, I don't think she gets the sort of the respect that she deserves, really, because, you know, everyone remembers Jo Grant and everyone remembers Sarah Jane Smith from that period. and Liz sort of gets a bit lost, which is a shame. And it would have been nice to have seen maybe another season with her as the companion, just to see where that relationship could have gone.
But it's because she gets an introduction, but it's sort of, she doesn't get her, well, here's your TARDIS key and here's the interior of the TARDIS and off we go to another planet. She doesn't get that. And she also doesn't get a farewell because she's just not there come the start of season 8. But in this story, she gets a whole action sequence to herself. Yeah. She gets a fucking car chase that she gets involved in, and she's driving Bessie, and
that's it. She gets to drive Bessie. The Doctor wouldn't have let Joe Grant drive Bessie, but it ended up into a hedge.
Straight into a ditch.
And speaking of what you said about, Liz doesn't get the whole TARDIS key moment, or doesn't have the whole go into the TARDIS and it's like, wow, it's bigger on the inside. No, she instead gets to see the TARDIS living room as it appears in this story.
Yeah. And that whole opening scene where the Doctor's sort of saying, well, this is, we're in a time loop and, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's interesting, but it's sort of, it comes across a bit like, well, we can't, not that we can't, but we're deciding not to go anywhere. And we're deciding not to do those things. And so just a quick reminder, this is a time machine and it is capable of doing these things. Yeah. But we're not going to go anywhere with it. Just remind you that it's sort of possible.
I like that. I like that it always, that this season always does try to keep the audience in mind that, the Doctor is trapped here on Earth. He should be out there doing all the traveling and all the things that you remember him doing, but he can't. And obviously, it's a big part of Inferno in particular. But TARDIS living room, it's really weird.
Not a good look.
No, it's not a good look. And I think there's a lot of people always sort of say like, well, is that inside the TARDIS or have they taken the console out? I mean, I think we assume the console's been removed because obviously we see it in Inferno as well. In the garage. The
TARDIS garage.
Garage. Yeah.
Which at least the windows of the garage in Inferno look a bit TARDIS-y.
They are, TARDIS-themed windows. Yeah.
So not only can the Doctor travel through space and time, because they're not able to do that, not only can the Doctor not dress the interior of his TARDIS living room particularly nicely, but just like in the Silurians, where he gets attacked from behind by the Crumhorn heralded Silurians marching towards him with their sound effect. Yeah. Episode 4, he also can't hear the radioactive astronaut coming up behind him.
I know, it's insane, isn't it? When we were watching it, we were like, how can he not hear this? It's so loud.
It's beautiful.
He's just deaf, I think.
Yeah, it must be. I mean, he's of an age, isn't he?
Yeah, that's it. Maybe too many explosions have been going off around him, and he's lost his hearing.
Too many handguns going pop, and he's just gone, deaf.
But he's too proud to say anything,
Talking of that, actually, one of the reasons I love the Third Doctor and John Pertwee's portrayal is that he is an army man, he is an action man, but the Third Doctor, or the Doctor generally, but the Third Doctor is firmly part of the, I don't want to say aristocracy, but he is an authoritarian.
Yes.
In an authoritarian setup with the military.
Yeah.
But it also detests authority. There's another couple of, like Sir James, who he comes up against in this story, who he absolutely detests and thinks is just an absolute fool and a big blowhard. Yeah. What do you think of that? Because there aren't many other instances of, at least over a period of time, the Doctor being constantly put up against and working with people that he absolutely hates, and yet has to be part of that world. I love that, and he brings it up with the Brigadier saying, is the Brigadier still blowing up the Silurians and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I in this story in particular, there's some really great moments in part 1 when they first go to the Space Center and the Doctor comes in, he's like a bull in a china shop and he charges in and he's very abrasive and, everyone here is far more stupid than he is, and he's not really afraid to upset anyone. And then as soon as he needs something, that sort of drops, and he takes on that sort of softly approach, like with the controller, where the brigadier sort of takes him to one side, and sort of says, come on, Doctor, he's only trying to do his job, sort of thing, and play the game, and he sort of goes over and he's like, sorry, old chap, and all that sort of stuff, and then he sort of becomes nice, and there's a lot of that in this story. He does it again later on. I love that sequence when they've got one of the henchmen prisoner.
Yes.
And they're trying to get the questions out of him, and then they go to walk out, and then he turns back and he's like, how are they treating you? Do you want a cup of tea? And all that sort of stuff. And then he goes, stand up to attention when I'm talking to you. And it brings out the military side of this guy. Very clever. It's really cool little, just these little glimpses of the character that you don't really ever sort of see that in the Doctor ever again. Maybe you might see it with potentially Capaldi, but I don't think you ever really sort of see that side of him, which is a shame. But it works so well, and perfect for this sort of story and this sort of setting. But it's interesting, like what you were saying about how his Doctor, while detesting authority and not having much. He doesn't really have an awful lot of time for people in like the upper classes, but he is one of them. It's really funny.
He dresses like it. He speaks like it. He addresses people like it. Even doing that, stand up to attention, man. Like that's Jon Pertwee.
Yeah, so, and he enjoys the finer things in life. He
loves his cheese and wine.
He loves his cheese and wine. And there was something going around Twitter recently, which was from the season 10 documentary that they did. And Stephen Moffat said something like, when writing the Doctor, he has to be all these things. If you want him to be incredibly left, well, yeah, of course he's incredibly left. But if you want him to be a card-carrying Tory, then he's also got to be that as well. And a lot of people are like, how dare you make the Doctor a card-carrying Tory? They're the enemy sort of thing. But Jon Pertwee's Doctor kind of is that, although also, he is very left.
Basically every actor that played the part up until Sylvester McCoy.
Yeah. They take the idea of being a Time Lord very seriously. They're a lord for a reason. And so I think that's where that kind of comes from. And you really get it here with John.
If you don't want to think the Doctor is himself, a member of the
aristocracy, isn't he?
Authoritarian, or aristocracy or whatever. Because when Christopher Eccleston was in Auckland doing his talk about being the Doctor, and it was mentioned, his accent and being Northern, and the fact that the Doctor had never spoken like that before.
Yeah.
He mentioned sort of the fact that the Doctor had always been part of the upper classes just by their accent.
Yeah.
And Jon Pertwee, I think, is the Doctor he is remembering when he talks about that, because Tom is an eccentric.
Yeah.
Peter is dressed in cricket whites, but ultimately doesn't have enough of anything going on character-wise to make you assume.
I think even with Davison, you sort of almost get that kind of Eton, higher educated, because he speaks so posh, and he's, he is a posh student almost. Do you know what I mean?
He is. If depending on whether or not he has to pay inheritance tax, he'll vote either Labour or Tory.
Oh, don't talk to me about inheritance tax. That's all I've got going on at the moment. It's a bloody nightmare.
I'll ignore that. But, he is a member of the English upper class.
Yeah.
The way he dresses, the way he talks, and even, at the time, being a military man, being a figure who had held a high position, and the way that he speaks and stand up. Like, you can't imagine in any other context somebody speaking to another person like that unless there is a subordinate superiority complex thing going on.
Yeah. Very much
and
so.
so that's what I find really interesting, that the kind of the fact that the Doctor and the Brigadier start off as opposites, and there's always that thread of, well, you believe in hierarchical structures, and you are a brigadier, and you have people underneath you, and you boss them around. But the Doctor can crack into the center of that and finds a character underneath.
Yeah,
we're in the early stages of that, but the Doctor is no different to the Brigadier at this point. And I think that's kind of where they clash, is that actually they're quite similar. They want to be barking orders at people and telling the other person what to do. Yeah. But the Doctor has no authority. The Doctor is not human. Yeah. And the Brigadier is ultimately the person that can point the finger and direct people to go in certain directions. And the Doctor just has to sort of sit there and go, well, I can give you an idea of what to do, but beyond that, I'm sort of, bollocks, really.
Yeah. And I guess really, if you want to turn it into a thing of like right and left, the Doctor's ideals are what sets him apart from, sort of the right wing side of things. And I think that's what makes the Doctor in classic Doctor Who more of an interesting character than what he becomes in 21st Century Who. Because I think in 21st Century Who, they just really do pin a flag on him of like, this man, this character is nice, and he stands for everything that is good and blah, 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 blah. Which is obviously, you can attribute that to the Doctor of classic Doctor Who. But he does things that are actually, like you said, well, he's not that different in some ways to some of the people that he stands up against. And, he does get things wrong, and he treats people in shitty ways. And I think it just makes for a more interesting character, because I think everybody, whether they like it or not, we are neither all of one thing or the other. There are facets to every human being in all sort of levels. And I think that's what makes the Doctor so interesting as an alien, is that he is that sort of the murky morals of the Doctor. We've been watching season 15 because that's just come out on the collection set. We were watching Image of the Fendal, and it was very interesting watching Colin Baker and all of the Behind the Sofa crew react to like Tom giving that guy the gun to blow his brains out with in the cellar of the Priory. And they were like, my God, how can they do this in Doctor Who, and like the Doctor wouldn't do something like that. And it's like, well, but maybe he does, maybe that is, maybe the Doctor isn't inherently pure and good and nice, and I think we've said this before, that sometimes we struggle when the Doctor is presented as just being completely nice. I think it makes it more interesting when there's the sort of murky edges.
Because there is a struggle here. Yeah. And, the Doctor's like kind of yearning for everything to be peaceful. I mean, really, I think this story obviously presents smaller examples of that interpersonal thing between the Doctor being an alien and an outsider, but also being very much part of this structure. But then you look at the previous story being Doctor Who and the Silurians, and obviously, really, from that point on, I think that's where Doctor Who changes fundamentally in terms of its moral perspective on things. Obviously, further into the John Pertwee era, you get Barry Letts coming in with his very, hey, bro, we're all just cool, bro. Whatever. I'm kind of joking there, but the Doctor's very, very strict moral guidelines. I mean, we always have known the Doctor is a force for good. Yeah. But the Doctor actively stepping in the way of things and saying, look, even if these people are at the moment invading or are causing strife or are through pure fear sort of retaliating or whatever it is, we've got to look at the middle of this, and we've got to find a peaceful resolution for both halves. Yeah. And again, this is touching very, very closely on things that are going on in the real world at the moment. But these episodes from, these stories sort of illustrate that it sometimes is not possible to draw that distinctive line between, the brigadier who is just there, queen and country. I've got a job to do. I'm there to protect. I've got my instructions, doctor, and you've got your moral obligations. Moral obligations don't come into it with the brigadier. And we don't get quite as much of that in this story. But it is this era, it is this season of Doctor Who that builds the Doctor's moral framework from just being, I'm just going to sort of potter around and see what I can do to fix things, to actually being in situations where he's having to delegate and he's having to bring these two completely separate ways of thinking to some kind of a resolution that the Doctor morally can walk away from it thinking, well, I've done the best that I can.
Yes. Yeah.
And, in the Silurians, obviously, the Doctor walks away from it thinking, I've tied that up nicely. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And it ends up turning out to be the worst possible outcome for the Silurians. We get less of that here. It's sort of less pointed and it's less political. Yeah. But you can see him still struggling against the structures that he's now working for and kind of indebted to, because they're keeping a roof over his head and the Doctor's got nobody. The Doctor's out on their own. They're exiled. Yeah. They have to work for these people.
And I think really, even from a sort of script editor's point of view, with this story, I think you could have very easily put in a line or two later on where the Doctor sort of said something like, well, I don't want a repeat of what happened with the Silurians to happen here. There's more going on here with these, until they realize they're ambassadors. There's more going on here with these alien creatures. And, I must make sure that it doesn't end in bloodshed like it did last time. And that innocent creatures aren't going to get just wiped off the face of the planet just for the sake of it. So it does feel kind of like a response to that, doesn't it? Because he does feel like, these are ambassadors, the whole conceit is very clever that, the aliens aren't invading us to invade us. It's our own people are using the aliens against us, which is a really, really neat concept. And I think it's just done very well. And from a visual standpoint, I think the ambassadors look great. It's a very simple thing that this alien spacesuits are just normal spacesuits, but shot the way that they're shot, they're very creepy. Again, with like the sound effects of the radiation, it just adds that little extra something.
I don't know whether or not it's been done on purpose. I mean, you kind of feel like maybe they've got to the location and the actors just steaming up inside their helmets, but even the condensation that builds on the inside of the helmets, it's like reminds you, okay, well, they're not going to take the helmet off and there's just like nothing underneath. There's something happening under there. And the fact that you don't see it for basically the whole story is really threatening. And the fact that radiation is sort of something that you can't see, that you just are sort of irradiated by and die. I mean, you get that kind of flaring effect, which I think when you see stuff like that on film in Doctor Who, it means, they've spent a bit of money here because that's an optical effect they've had to sort of key in.
Yes.
But, when the ambassadors are sort of frying people, it looks great. And it's just simple. It's almost like stuff that you get with the mummies in pyramids and other monsters where you think, all I need to do is touch you and you're
dead. Yeah. It's really cool. And obviously the whole thing plays on all the fears of that time. You just sort of said about radiation. We've had all the stuff during the Second World War, Hiroshima, and, we've got the Cold War, this threat of, nuclear attack, radiation. What will it do to us? That is all looming. Space travel, we've gone into space, we've gone to the moon, but, should we be doing stuff like that? What if we bring something back with us? It's really clever. It really ties into all of those anxieties that, people probably had at the time. It's really good. And I mean, going back to like the Bond thing, there are a few tropes. You've got the evil foreign scientist in Bruno Tatalian, which I can't ever really understand. What is he French? Is he?
Yeah.
I mean, he sounds French, but his name kind of sounds Italian.
It does sound Italian. I thought it was Darktalion for the longest time, and he's, he kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in this story as a character. He's like, well, spot the one that's going to turn out to be a double agent by the end of it.
Who's the baddie?
That is such a Tory Doctor Who.
Yes.
The foreigner.
The foreigner is the baddie, obviously. Yeah. And the whole thing, the Doctor might as well just turn around to him in the first episode and go, so you're a baddie, aren't you? And he'd be like, what? No, what are you saying? Yeah, you're a baddie. You're a wrong one, I can tell.
He should have just gone, I don't understand. Just play dumb. Just be there sort of asking for directions in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. You go down there is the time. That's he does form the basis of another great cliffhanger though, because there's a couple of instances of sort of shock. What's going on there?
Yeah.
When Tartalian sort of backs up against the wall with a pistol in his hand, and you go, he is a baddie, you bastard.
And that very dramatic shot, isn't it? It's again a lot of really well directed. Because
a lot of crash zooms and stuff.
Yeah, and it just really just energizes the action. It's really, really cool. And like going back to what we were saying earlier about like the grittiness of this story, when they dump the bodies of the two henchmen.
That's very Goldfinger. And then, just to double up on the Goldfinger James Bond thing, they get into the laundry van, the logo changes, and the fucking number plates revolve like a DB5.
Yeah. So we know what the inspiration was there for sure.
Absolutely.
But it's great. Something I did notice, and I don't know if, I'm sure people have noticed this, but the henchmen, because obviously all that stuff is in studio, and then obviously they go out on location to get in the van. But I'm pretty sure the henchmen that are in the studio are not the henchmen that walk out of the building on location.
Probably not. They paid Havoc for the location stuff, and they just got any bastard on, facelessgoons.com. Oh, it wouldn't have been a website back then. Yellow Pages. Thumbing through it and said, do you need a faceless goon in your TV production?
Yeah, and I think one of them is actually Gron from Curse of Paladin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he's about 8 foot tall.
But he's a regular in the old Doctor Who Havoc unit, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because I guess he's a big burly bloke. And, he looks imposing. So, yeah. But I was like, I know that face.
I didn't even notice at the time. Before I forget as well, I mentioned earlier, there's obviously the How Many Beans Make Five cliffhanger, but there's another cracking cliffhanger in this. Again, somebody held at gunpoint, but it's Carrington. I think it's the end of episode 6 with... I'm sorry, Doctor, it's my moral duty.
My moral duty, yeah.
And then you get that shot of the barrel of the gun.
Yeah.
And it's, like you say, it's gritty, but it doesn't steer away from, it's a bit daft, it's a bit camp. Because it does constantly sort of remind you, well, there's radioactive spacemen wandering around. And all of that. It treads that line very well.
Yeah, and like even the stuff that we said earlier with Bessie, and even like the getaway van having the rotating number plates and the changing sign, all that stuff is, again, it's very tongue in cheek. But then you get stuff like Regan's character when he goes to the fuel pumps and he kicks that technician off the gantry, and then we see him land and there's a crack, and you think, bloody hell, what is going on here? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine in a Shooty Gatwa Doctor Who story, someone getting kicked off of something and breaking their back?
Well, I was thinking earlier, I saw a GIF of a Stephen Moffat episode, and I was thinking, Jesus, that was pretty gratuitous. But it was one of the bankers, I think, or one of the characters in Time Heist when they get their
heads. Oh, that was horrible. Yeah.
And I was thinking, between the back snapping and somebody being turned into pizza from Ambassadors of Death, the head caving in, Necros, Dalek, mutant.
Yeah,
there's not an awful lot of crazy, grim violence in Doctor Who, but, the threat in this story does exist. I mean, even Liz getting chased on the reservoir and nearly slipping into the water, that's quite, because it's a relatively impressive stunt considering the fact it's all done on film and it's a cliffhanger. I think it's part 3's cliffhanger, I think.
Yeah.
There's threat, but, it never tips over into dread, which I think, as we were sort of saying, sort of keeps it on that level pegging of it's a daft espionage.
Yes.
Run around Bond film,
Yeah. Again, just looking at my notes, another very Bond moment is when Professor Lennox is taken to Unit HQ and, he's worried about his safety. So they lock him in the prison cell. And then when the food comes and they remove the cloche and there's the bloody radioactive isotope underneath, that is such a Bond moment. You can imagine that in a Bond film. It's great. It's just those little moments like that. And I think one thing that I've never really sort of thought about it before, but I really appreciated was that the reveal of Carrington right at the start. You see he is the baddie right at the beginning at the warehouse. And then, of course, we then see him as General Carrington. So there's this lovely sort of dramatic irony throughout the whole story where the audience is like, Doctor, he's the baddie. He's the baddie for about 6 episodes until the final reveal. And it's unusual that they do that, later on, latterly with like the Master's always in disguise. And then you have the, waha, it's me all along. But
he still maintains that sort of stiff upper lip. He doesn't drop the facade of being a general.
No.
And that's what makes you think, well, he's doing this for, the good of everybody, because he's maintaining that sort of, it's brilliant. One thing I was going to say, just from a production standpoint, is I don't get this so much from Inferno, because I think you're dealing with ideas that Doctor Who hasn't really done before, like the parallel Earth thing, and the fact that that's quite doom laden, and there's a lot of location work. Obviously, this has a lot of location work as well. But then, Silurians, maybe, certainly not Spearhead. But if this was presented to you in black and white, it's got some production hangovers, I think, from a visual way, just some of the way some of it is shot, that makes it feel like a 60s episode of Doctor Who. I mean, certainly, I was just watching episode 7 just then, and even the way that the sound is recorded, people opening and closing doors, the way that the cameras pan around, some of the set stuff is shot quite flat. If it was shot in black and white, it just has that feel that it hasn't quite entered the 70s yet.
No, I know what you mean.
A lot of this was still being produced, I guess, in the, in 69.
Yeah. A lot of it would have been shot in 69, I guess. And I think the thing is, of course, that for a lot of us, we would have watched this in black and white because it only existed in black and white for the longest time. Obviously, episode 1 existed in colour, and, out of the 7 episodes, it is the one that looks the best because the original tapes still exist. Then everything after that looks a little bit ropey. And watching it back, you can't quite appreciate how nice all of the film sequences must look. Because obviously the original tapes don't exist. So it'll be interesting to see how they tackle this story when it eventually comes out on Blu-ray. I mean, I imagine it's going to need a lot of work, but I think between the time that this came out on DVD in colour, in full colour for the first time, technology's moved on quite a bit. I mean, we've just seen, Doctor Who and the Daleks in colour. And, the whole technological advancements in terms of like using AI to enhance colour and things like that.
I didn't want to say it, but yeah. You know.
I mean, and I don't mean using AI in terms of like, put in a prompt and get a whole new image, that sort of evil AI. I just sort of mean like the AI. I mean, AI is in everything now. AI is in my bloody Premiere Pro to come up with the captions for things. It just reads the sound and it generates the captions. So I mean that sort of thing. If there is a way to draw out the color,
if you can sort of say, well, this frame, analyze this character. Yeah, their shirt is white, their tie is red, blah 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 blah, and then obviously you have to do manual touch-ups with stuff like that because it just is not at that stage.
I was doing something the other day, and I was generating auto captions, and I think I went into pretty much 90% of the captions and had to correct every bit of dialogue to the point where I was like, I probably could have just written this out myself and it would have been just as easy.
I was, I can say this now because I'll be working my notice period when this goes out. But the job that I've been doing is captioning New Zealand news programs, and it's a live captioning. There's sort of a speech recognition software that will hear what I'm saying and plop stuff out on screen. And you don't have any time really to edit the captions as they go out because you've got to be quick with it if it's a live link and there's a reporter at the scene. Yeah. And there was a reporter at the scene in Newmarket in the centre of Auckland, and they were saying, for some reason, New Zealand has only just started getting ram raids. Apparently that's like a big thing here now, even though it was something that was being tackled in the 80s in the UK.
Yeah.
And there was somebody out there saying, yes, there's been a reported ram raid in a jewellery shop in Newmarket. And I said ram raid, but because my accent, it needed a bit of training with the software, it came out and was broadcast as there has been a reported ram rape in the centre of Auckland. I was like, okay, we've still got a bit of time to go before this AI software is ready to be sent out without any editing.
A very different type of crime.
A very different kind of crime, and something that I hope isn't a real thing.
Yes.
Because it sounds awful. I mean, what more can we say about the ambassador's death, really? I mean, it is just... It's a story I think more people need to go back and watch, for a start.
So, I mean, this is something I should have said at the beginning. This was never a story that I was that into. I've got to say, I was very much on the same level as a lot of the people that responded to the tweet. As much as, like, it's good, but it's just too long. And I always used to find that it was like, you get captured and then you run away, then you get captured. And there is a little bit of that. But rewatching it the last time and rewatching it this time as well, I enjoy it more each time. And I think, it's one of those stories. Normally I would sort of say, if it's a 7-parter, well, watch it over 7 consecutive evenings or something to pace it out. But to be honest, we watched like 4 episodes back to back because we got so into it. And I think the story, it does move along quite well. And they
think, though, around episode 4, it does start to lose a bit of steam?
I think it does a little bit.
That's where a lot of that stuff could be cut and it could become a 6-parter.
And I think that's probably why we were able to watch like the first 3 or 4 episodes back to back. And then we thought, okay, right, we'll stop here. I think it does do a good job of, trying to introduce new little elements within each episode to try and keep the pace going. Whether it's the character of Regan comes into it, or you've got the professors coming into it, and all those sort of elements. Liz getting kidnapped. It does its best to try and fill out those 7 episodes. But yeah, like you said, I think it does. If you lost one, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But at the same time, you couldn't do it in 4. It's that sort of mix. But yeah, I mean, it is good. I have to concede that it's a really good story. Watching it back, I was like, ambassadors why didn't we get any ambassadors figures? That would have been a great set.
Yeah.
One sculpt, removable helmet. You could have done John in the same space suit. It would have been really cool. Don't say that
now, Matt, because people are going to go, we're getting an ambassador's figure before we get a good Donna.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, about time. It's been 50 years since Ambassadors of Death aired. They're overdue a figure. I gotta say, and I love the reveal when they take the helmet off. That effect. So I tried to work out what they've done there. Do you think they've painted the guy's face blue and then CSO'd an effect onto the blue to make the skin all bubbly and weird? It works very well. It's very cool.
Brilliant. And it's, considering the fact that they've been building up, what is underneath there, but also the radioactive effect that they give off and the damage they can do. When they take it off, you do go, I think that's what radioactive poisoning looks like.
It looks like,
It's horrible.
It is horrible.
The only thing I feel like you don't get really with the story is any sense that these were people prior to, whatever happened on Mars Probe 7, because there's a lot made in that first episode, people being referred to by their first names, even having the name tags on there and their nationality and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And you definitely get that now. You'd get, the doctor, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You get all of that,
Yeah. Oh, he was a father of two, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
But you feel like that would kind of help a little bit. You don't want it to be too needlessly mopey and gratuitous in terms of that sentimentality. But
you want that hooked for you to want to rescue these men, don't you? Exactly,
because by the time that you actually get the reveal, and for the majority of the story where they're just sort of marching around as sort of helmeted creatures, that's all they are. You kind of forget that all of that stuff had been set up so effectively in episode 1.
But they're having a nice old time there watching the fake football on the weird hypno TV screen.
It's beautiful.
It's so good. I mean, I do have to laugh when we actually see the full creature in whatever episode it is, and it is like a man in a pair of mittens going, why do you delay? Where are the ambassadors? And it's Peter Halliday. It's the same voice actor from the Silurians. He's obviously just come off the back of The Invasion playing Packer. God, his bloody agent must have been rubbing their hands with glee.
Do you want to play another throwaway character in a camp TV series? Yes, please. That is my bread and butter.
Yeah, like can you voice an alien? Yes. Can you voice another alien?
Will they know it's me? No. Okay, fine. Yes,
I'll do it. Yeah.
At least I can get work in more respectable stuff if they don't know it's me doing the mitten character.
Yeah. And I like the way that this story ends. Just to wrap it up, you were saying about how Carrington, throughout the story, he sticks to his guns about, this is my moral duty. And I like the way that when the game is up and he turns around to the doctor and he's like, you understand though, don't you? What? And the doctor's like, yes, I understand. And there's that sort of, he gives him that sort of pitying look, like, you poor chap, you're shot away. Which he is.
Even the way that's staged, it kind of reminded me a bit of the end of Genesis. With that sort of like getting pinned against the wall, kind of like, everything I've set up has just come undone. And it's my fault. But, like, help me out.
Yeah. It's just really well written. It's David Whittaker, he knows what he's doing. It's great. So I like that. I like that, he's not shot or he's not, killed by the aliens, that he survives. But, at the end of the day, he's just a man suffering from severe PTSD.
Broken,
he had this fucking mad alien encounter and got sight of the hypno telly and thought, whoa, that's not much of the day.
Hypnotoad for a second there.
The Hypnotoad. That's what happened. They got there and they said, would you like to lick the Hypnotoad?
But it's the same sound.
It's the same. Yeah.
It's the same. It's the same thing. So we found the ultimate big bad of season 7. It's the Hypnotoad.
Yeah, Hypnotoad. Yeah, and it hasn't been revealed yet. So stay tuned for Disney Doctor Who series 2. Hypnotoad is the big bad. He's been playing the long game since 1970.
I think, what was it? Futurama's on Hulu, and Hulu's now owned by Disney now. So
it's there. And her name's Leela as well. So is she Tila? Is she Tila or Leela? I forgot.
Leela in Futurama.
It is Leela, isn't it? Yeah. Tila's He-Man. What am I talking about? So there we go. And then I love how the Doctor's just like, all right, well, I'll leave you lot to sort this out. Say, hang on, we got 3 aliens here. We got to send them back up into space.
I was watching it literally just now, and I scrubbed to the end, and I was like, well, how much longer have I got left to go? And I hit probably midway through the credits, and I was like, I scrubbed back 30 seconds before,
Yeah.
and I was like, the story's still going. It's not even, it's not been wrapped up yet. You know?
I mean, not to put ideas in their head, not that they need them, but I'm almost amazed that there's not been a unit box set from Big Finish Productions where it's like returning the ambassadors, return to sender, ambassadors of death box set, and it's just the Brigadier and that whole lot, and as they try to send the ambassadors off, someone else tries to nick them. You know,
they're still in that room. They're still having a chat.
Yeah.
You know, I don't give them the idea. I think that's what's quite nice about the ambassadors of death and other monsters from this sort of era is they are one shot. It's like, and especially because it's a 7-part story, it's like, well, their whole thing is wrapped up now, and you've had this adventure, and there's something quite nice about sort of not revisiting it, because it makes it gives that story more weight, and it's like, it's just great. And I mean, we wax lyrical about season 7, but this is not a story that people talk about from that period.
No.
But it's absolutely worth going back to.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I really enjoyed going back to watch this one. We haven't done many John Pertwee stories really on the pod. No. So it's been good to revisit this particular era, and especially in a story that, like we said, is kind of a bit of a Marmite one, really. You either really love it, or you either think, oh God, it's too long. But yeah, definitely worth rewatching. Right, so next time, I think our last one before Doctor Who comes back on the telly.
I was going to say, because you say it's the only John Pertwee, or one of few John Pertwees we've done as part of the podcast, and so I'll get onto that in a minute. But yes, the next episode will be, at the moment, it's kind of penciled in as a preview of Series 14, Season 1.
Yeah.
As we head into it, obviously beginning on the 11th of May with the double header of Space Babies and The Devil's Cord. Not sure quite how we'll manage that. It might be that we do both of them at once, I guess, because they'll both be coming out at the same time. I
guess we'll have to, won't we, really?
Yeah.
They force our hand.
To do it.
The bastards.
Curse you. And then from that point on, it's, I mean, as far as close as we can make it, considering the fact you're going to go to Brazil and all that sort of stuff, we'll do the podcast weekly, reviewing the new series as it's coming out. There'll be stuff coming out on the Patreon as well. We've got the Doctor Who Night commentary, Doctor Who Night 1999, the thing that made me a fan, so fondly remembered by yourself and so many other people as well. So we'll be going through that. Also on the Patreon, just uploaded is our 00 Rod, A View to a Kill video, which is really good fun. So you should check that out. And also
that was a laugh.
The Never Say Never Again, which was before. But that sort of covers us up until July is sort of new Doctor Who. Once we're through that, though, we're going to be coming back to John Pertwee, because this year is 10 years of the Review of Death. Yes. The first ever review we did was Death to the Daleks.
Oh,
so we'll
perfect.
be going back and reviewing Death to the Daleks.
Love it.
And yeah, lots of other cool things coming up. We're going to go back through, not, sequentially, but we'll be going back and dipping our toes back into the Jodie Whittaker era for the first time as part of the podcast, minus Flux.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots to come. But we're going to be mainly focusing on Series 14, Season 1 episodes as and when they drop.
They come out. Lovely stuff. Right. Until then, see you all very soon. Farewell. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.